Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about movies, music, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the new Bill Callahan album titled Dream River. You know, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but you know what? Here it is. I got to put it all out on the table. I think I might be softening to my opinion on white guys with acoustic guitars. I know, believe me, I am as shocked as you guys probably are. But really, it's not so much as a sample of my taste changing, but more in line with a hunt for something that I've had a lot of trouble finding in mainstream music recently. Texture. Now keep in mind this isn't a reflexive hate of pop music either, even though pop can have some of the least amount of texture in music as a genre, but rather a search for music that has feeling and as organic and has little bits of the actual instrumentation developing and that sound growing into something that has real grit or roughness. It actually feels like it has some texture behind it. It comes from a place of real emotion and depth. And while I doubt I'll ever have enough passion for acoustic music that I'm going to teach myself guitar or something, I have realized that more of the instrumental texture tends to survive the sanding process if one goes towards the independent scene. Because when it comes down to it, at my core, I'm a guy who cherishes real honest emotions and well-written songs rooted in those emotions. Now, that's one of the reasons I've always liked country and folk over the general acoustic scene as well. If you're just writing songs to pick up chicks and get laid, you're going to get dismissed as a hapless novice by songwriters who have a real story to tell. And if said stories can be paired with rich, gripping instrumentation that deftly accents and emphasizes various elements in the story, well, that's ultimately where I find plenty of my favorite songs from acts like guys like Bob Dylan and Paul Simon and Nick Cave and Richard Thompson and others. So with all that in mind, let's talk about Bill Callahan. Now, for those of you who don't know, Bill Callahan has been around the edges of the indie scene since around the 90s, often performing under the name Smog with a much more harsh, rock-infused style, even though not entirely that harsh. This is Bill Callahan here. Only in recent years has he chosen to perform under his own name and release a series of critically acclaimed albums steeped in folk and Americana, which you should all check out because they're amazing. So, as someone who likes both folk and Americana music, as the guy who actually likes Springsteen and Mellencamp, and who was seeking some great instrumental texture, who's been spent over 20 years making music in the independent scene, I was interested to see how his new album Dream River turned out. So, what'd I find out? Dear God, guys, this album, Bill Callahan's Dream River, is not just a superb example of modernized folk and Americana, it's also this haunting and impressively detailed album that might just be one of the best albums of the year. No, forget might be, it is one of the best albums of the year. Not kidding. It was everything I was hoping for from this guy and more, and dear God, was I grateful that I got a chance to check this out. Now, I went into this particular exercise searching for instrumental texture, and if we're looking for an act that has rich production and that organic texture that I was hoping for, Bill Callahan would definitely fit the bill. You know, I would even have a hard time calling this guy a white guy with an acoustic guitar, at least in the traditional sense, because most of the guitars on these tracks are nestled at the very back of the mix, giving most of the songs a quiet, seething energy reminiscent of post-punk, but without that suppressed anger of post-punk, but with all the simmering swell just waiting to explode at the right moments. Instead, Callahan's richer, deeper voices at the top of the mix, a more natural fit for folk as his voice is actually deepened and richened with age. If I'm going to be a little honest here, it's still a little bit too reserved for my taste. The emotion is more controlled and carefully delivered, which dampens some of the rawness I was hoping for. It's very much in line though with The National, which is, in that case, it's still powerful all the same when he does reveal shreds of vulnerability, which he does do here. This album is something of a stylistic shift for Callahan, and it's something that's a bit more downbeat and melancholic and not as filled with wry sarcasm and wit. And while you can tell it's something of a new fit for him, he has adjusted fairly well to the quieter, more stripped down tones surprisingly effectively. And to complement his voice, Callahan has brought together the raw, almost country-esque strings and violins and these reedy pipes to the very front and top of the mix, only letting the rough edges of the guitar to slide in only in subtle ways to augment the melody when they're precisely needed. What I love about this production is that it very much serves the deeper theme of this album of isolation. Some of the sounds representing more quiet, intimate emotions and feelings are kept close and at the top of the mix. These are sounds that you don't typically find in a lot of music. They're not typically used to express these big, broad, powerful emotions. With louder guitars that are typically used to express those bigger emotions, they're kept suppressed and carefully restrained until the very few incidents where they're allowed to explode outwards. Combined with the hollow-sounding drums that could almost represent the passage of time on their own, the album's instrumentation and production neatly mirrors that of one of the primary themes of this album, that of the lone wanderer, who seeks companionship but only in his own way, quite comfortable with his wry, intimate, running commentary on the proceedings around him, almost as if he's talking to himself and he doesn't care who the audience is. This is a conversation with a close friend who is always on the road in another way, who may at points be alone, but is never really lonely. Now, we have to talk about the songwriting, the true area where this album is just glows with burnished professionalism and beautiful poetry. Bill Callahan has long ago made an art of painting a very vivid picture with words and saying a lot while writing very, very little. And a lot of these excellent traits are on display here. The technical songwriting, as analogous to the instrumentation, has been pared down slightly. It's been simplified, but it's been simplified in a good way because it's more of an ongoing rhyme or free-flowing story than carefully constructed verse and chorus. And yet you can tell there's enough thought placed in every line, and Callahan's a good enough songwriter that it definitely works throughout this album. The opening song, The Sing, is this gorgeous example of how Callahan can recreate a scene damn near perfectly, in my mind at least. In this case, being alone and weary amongst strangers at a dark hotel bar. The song sets the traveler motif of the album excellently in the final lines. We're looking for a body, or a means to make one sing. It's Billy Joel's Piano Man in 2 lines, and it's incredible how much raw pathos in which Callahan infuses those lyrics. Once again, it's taking a look at the isolation of being traveling and being on your own, and yet you're still searching for that raw connection. The other section of that song that I particularly liked was where I only said 3 lines in this bar tonight: beer and thank you. Now, these are very, very simple lines, and he repeats them a few times afterwards, but it very much implies that a guy who's just on his own, like sitting at the hotel bar, perhaps with a lonely bartender, might be people over the side of him, but he doesn't really care. He's just doing his own thing. The world might change around him, but there are some things and some people who will always say the same, and that's a really potent message that he delivers in a beautiful way in that opening track. Now, there are 2 other primary motifs besides the traveler that Callahan brings to the table on this album, both which complement and underline that overarching theme of quiet isolation and that seeking for that smaller connection. The theme of the river and that of seasons, which underscores the progression of the final 5 songs of the album. If I were going to provide a little bit of a nitpick here, I wish that overall seasonal theme had stretched throughout the entire album, because it would have given it a bit of more of a contained feeling, I feel. But yet, the seasonal motif is where I feel Callahan gets the most out of Dream River, as it's a beautiful subversion of traditional emotions associated with said seasons in popular culture, at least at first it is. Spring is supposedly the time of youth, wild coupling, and making love, and while that might be the song lyrically on the surface that Callahan is presenting, the song is brooding and sarcastic and pretty dark, all things considering, recognizing that these fleeting connections are what they are. They're shallow and branding them as the whims of a careless mind. That's a potent emotion. And then Summer Painter, easily an entry into the list of just fantastic songs that Callahan has written, one for the ages here. This is a song telling the story of a lonely guy who repaints and renames boats at the behest of rich and poor. On all these boats are shattered after a hurricane, and yet Callahan's lonely, half-forgotten, half-blamed painter remains intact and unchanged because he's managed to isolate himself and build dams around himself and at least be able to continuously move on with his life. It's a pretty potent message, and the wonderful thing about it is that the framing it doesn't exactly paint him as in the right here. And while it's always said that some of the people in the village blamed him for causing the hurricane, the framing is left ambiguous, so you might not even realize whether or not he caused it at all. Now, this river motif actually comes up consistently as well, giving this quiet tranquility of small plane with a guy in a lonely small plane flying along a river, and continuing throughout the album in Ride My Arrow, returning to the motif that while the river might be muddy or clouded or might split into various ways and form into a delta, the arrow about it continues to go straight. Seagull explores the exact same motif, this time showing how a sailor might be enticed to a dream of home on the shore, only to eventually return to the sea. But what this song manages to get is this mood of chosen isolation and detachment can actually be dangerous. And it shows how it intentionally blurs the line and shows that more nuanced picture. Now, that actual choice to detach has a real price, as it can sunder relationships in two. The final track, Winter Road, is actually one of the more surprising tracks because it takes the typical bleak season of winter and tries to play it with a certain degree of upbeat melancholy, if that makes any sense, but it's also very self-critical and perhaps the most honest, as it directly comments on the tumultuous road life, a life that he loves and one that he has chosen on pursuing. and then one realizes that the nebulous home Callahan professes to which he might be heading might not even exist. It might just be the road on which he continues to travel. And the fact that this album ends on this decidedly melancholy and ambiguous note just frames the thesis of this album beautifully. If you choose to take to the road, you will indeed pass by many of the problems of the world. You'll be able to pass above them. But it's a quiet, it's a lonely road that many will shy away from and many cannot take. Now, we should savor these quiet moments in which we can find that fragment of inner peace and connection, whether it be on the road or at home. That adventurous spirit might take us to the road, or we might be able to find those smaller moments just on our own and within a comfortable environment. But either way, we should be finding those moments and we should be savoring them because they fleet away with the passage of time. And in case you haven't been able to tell already, I love this album. Bill Callahan has written a goddamn masterpiece here with beautiful songwriting and striking imagery on Dream River, and this album comes with a high recommendation. Look, it's not quite perfect for me, which means it does earn the 9 out of 10, but dear God, it is definitely something special. If you're a fan of intelligent, textured, descriptive, incredibly emotionally evocative albums, you all need to check this out yesterday. Dream River is really something special, and I found it tremendously moving. And look, it's not always a serene or comfortable album, even for those who are looking to pursue that more adventurous spirit. Callahan has more than enough to say that targets that reception and warns you against it. But he's also telling us that the moments of comfort are few and far between, and they can be found anywhere. We just have to keep looking for them. So yeah, I have to highly recommend the album, and thanks for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful to take a look at some of the other things that if you guys want to suggest anything, or if there's anything that I might do to improve my performance, I'm always on the lookout to find out what I can do. Until then, see you next time.